Draft talk today, and the Arizona Cardinals need to remove the bird from their helmet.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Cardinals. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms. I am your host, Alex Clancy. Again, please go and like the YouTube channel as well. Just search Locked On Arizona Cardinals, hit subscribe, turn the notifications on, hit a like on the video, leave a comment, join the family. Marcus Mosher from Pro Football Focus, but more closely to us, the host of Locked On Cowboys, is going to join me. One of the better draft minds that I've come into contact with in my 12 years or so in this business. We're going to talk Cardinals draft. 2 segments. I'm doing what I want to do first, though, in this segment. First, this episode of Locked On Cardinals, something else I want to do is talk to you about. The sponsor of today's podcast is FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. I put out on Twitter, and I've had a lot of great engagement, so thank you. If you're with me on Twitter, again, at Clancy's Corner, I tweeted out that if the Cardinals do, in fact, change their uniforms, and this was sparked by their pro shop, their team store, was being closed down for a few days. Turns out it's not because of an unveiling of new uniforms, but it just made me, it gave me a catalyst to, talk about uniforms. Because it's something that we've talked about so much. Like, oh God, they're antiquated. They're antiquated. I think personally that they need to take the bird off the helmet. And there's a couple different reasons. Okay. So for the people who've been lifelong fans, just go with me here. First of all, appreciate your patronage. It's been a tough go. The cardinal on the side of the helmet is a signifier of a perennial losing organization. That's what it signifies. Dysfunction. Losing. And sure, they've had runs. I mean, Kurt Warner, they made the NFC Championship game at the end of the 2015 season, but hasn't been great. With that, it's not a total rebranding. I'm not saying change the name of the organization. I'm just saying try something fresh. Well, Alex, what do you think they should put on the side of the helmet? I don't care. I don't care if they put a slice of cherry pie on the side of the helmet. Doesn't matter to me as long as it's not that bird. And this is not hate towards the history of the organization whatsoever. That's not what this is about. When the Cardinals are rebuilding for the upteenth time, maybe come out looking like a completely different organization, because that's, if this goes to plan, what's going to happen. The Cardinals are being rebranded. They're being rebuilt. They're being retooled. They're being everything. Refoundationalized, recultured, everything. It is a hard reset on the organization. So why not look at what this uniform is and say, you know what? Maybe a fresh look would go well with a complete reset of the organization. That's just me. And I wanted to say it. So what should they put on the side? I don't know. Like a bear helmet would be fine. Just black, just red, just white, just gray. I know there's a gray color that's been floating around that I think is sexy as hell. They need to shift up the boring nature of the uniforms and what is the head of the snake, as it were, of the boring uniforms, the damn bird. I wanted to spend 5 minutes. I did. And now I'm done. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Get rid of the damn bird on the helmet. start fresh. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Marcus Mosher of Pro Football Focus, and again, more closely, Locked On Cowboys, going to join me next for 2 segments to talk draft. Should they trade back? Is Will Anderson that much better than Tyree Wilson? Is Will Anderson that much better than Jalen Carter if he's at 3, even though he's had a tough offseason, whether it be his workouts or run-ins with the law? I'm going to ask him all about it. That's next. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. First, this episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is over. Almost. We've got 4 teams left. Saturday, Monday, baby. No 1 seeds, no 2 seeds, no 3 seeds. But you know what is a 1 seed? FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if they don't win their first bet. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the nets, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. This is someone who is very high in demand. This is someone who is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the best draft and football minds that I've been lucky enough to come into contact with over the past decade plus I've had in this industry. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Marcus Mosher, dude. Hey, how's it going?
What's going on? What's going on, Alex? I'm excited that we finally get to do this.
Yeah, man. It's Jimmy Hoffa's body and it's Marcus Mosher. 2 of the toughest things to find. No, it's good. I mean, when you have friends that are busy, like we've been trying to do this for a while, and I'm glad that, we're able to facilitate for both of us. So let's dive right into this. Will Anderson seems to be the belle of the ball, and this is the time of this process, a couple weeks out from the draft, where fans will look at who they trust the most, look at their mock drafts, be like, okay, I side with this. I try to challenge people here on Locked On Cardinals. I try to say, you know what? Don't just be a mouthpiece for something somebody else said. Look, watch a little film, go to YouTube, watch Will Anderson, watch Tyree Wilson, watch Jalen Carter, watch Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon. Like, look at all of the guys that the Cardinals could potentially draft if they stick at 3 or trade back, and kind of come to your own conclusion. Now, for me, and you tell me if I'm wrong, if you disagree, I think this is a must trade back if the Cardinals can get anything salvageable to move back a couple spots. Do you agree, or is Will Anderson that transcendent where you cannot pass up on him?
I think it depends on how far you trade back, right? If you're trading back to, let's say, 5 or 6 or 7, and you're getting a first rounder plus or just a boatload that you can't pass up on, I get it. I think Arizona's in a spot where they need to start stockpiling picks. However, I would not just trade away for the fact of trading away, because I think Will Anderson is special. I've been doing a lot of charting of edge rushers over the last 40 years. And here's the list of edge rushers who've run a sub 4.65 40-yard dash and averaged more than 2 tackles for a loss in their best season ever. It's Will Anderson, and that's the list. He is special. We have never seen a college producer like him. And the fact that he did it at Alabama in the SEC against teams that knew he was the star in every single snap makes me believe that he is a generational edge rusher that I would be really nervous about passing on or trading away from, regardless of the package that they get.
That's interesting. And I was afraid you were going to say that, but here's the thing is, like, first of all, if Indy wants to move up 1 spot to solidify, they get a second rounder move back, get him anyways.
No
Perfect
brainer.
scenario.
No brainer.
Yeah. And I mean, barring like Tennessee getting a stick up their rear and say, you know what, here's the Trey Lance package to move back to 11, something like that. Sure. The thing I'm struggling with here is Monty Ossenfort, Jonathan Gannon et al., Michael Bidwell, are going to need to unravel and rebuild all of the mistakes that Steve Keim has made. So what I've said, I've had you on here, Steve Keim never ate his vegetables in the first round, never drafted offensive line, never went interior defensive line, went ILB, traded for a wide receiver.
Yep.
So I've said the Cardinals don't deserve to draft Will Anderson because of the state of the team. And I know that if they do, it's a win-win. Like, they're going to be terrible next year if Kyler Murray's out, and that's fine. They're going to have a top pick next year, it seems. But is Will Anderson that much better than Tyree Wilson or another edge rusher? Because I know there's a couple, not at his. I know he's one of one, but like, if the Cardinals were to get, say, a second and a third this year to move back 2 spots or something like that, giving up the chance for Will Anderson, is there that much of a gap between him and everybody else?
I think so, but I think the better thing for Cardinal fans is the gap between pick edge rusher 2. You mentioned Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson and the edge that you're going to get at 34 is not that significant. Like if Will McDonald, the kid from Iowa State, he falls to the second round, I think that's a home run pick. And if you can drop back from 3 to 7 and get a future first round pick and still grab the player of your choice at that spot, I think you almost have to do it, because you mentioned like they need a couple meat and potatoes drafts right now just to build up the middle of the roster, and they need those picks. So I could see them doing that. But I want to ask you, Alex, if it's not Will Anderson at 3 and they trade away, let's assume a 7. Who is the dream pick for you outside of Anderson?
I mean, the thing is, for me, is if it's not Will Anderson, and the Jalen Carter thing's interesting because this isn't Laramie Tunsil 15 minutes before the draft. Like, if the misdemeanors stay misdemeanors and that goes away, if he gets his keister back in gear, like if they trade back in a vacuum, I've talked to many smart people who say he may be the better choice at 3 over Will Anderson, depending need. It would be him, but it would also be, to answer your question, like succinctly, find a way to get an offensive lineman, trade back to 8, 9, or 10 and draft an offensive lineman, because they need offensive line, interior defensive line, edge, and corner. But if you can't protect Kyler Murray, none of this is going to work. And I've said that since 2019. So it would probably be that.
And I agree with you. I just don't love the offensive tackles in this class. And pick whoever you want, whether it's Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, Peter Skoronski. I think those are all like mid-first type of guys. And if Arizona's drafting inside the top 7, I want an elite player. So for me, if it's not Willie Anderson, the only other player that checks every box that you want for a Cardinal, right? Athleticism, production, important position, is Christian Gonzalez. And I think he is as good or better than Patrick Surtain, than J.C. Horn. I think he's better than Derek Stingley, who went 3 last year. If that's their fallback option after Willie Anderson, I still think you're getting a home run player and you're picking up assets in this draft.
Yeah, and Marcus Mosher, Locked On Cowboys and at Pro Football Focus, I agree. And that's the thing. It's like you're going to get Christian Gonzalez, and you're also going to for sure get a first if you're drafting him in the first round. And then you put yourself in a scenario. All of these top teams now, aside from the ones who traded, Seattle and Philly, who gets a pick, you're in the Caleb Williams sweepstake next year with another lottery ticket.
Absolutely.
Just in case. So, and that's going to be a fun conversation. If the Cardinals do get the number 1 overall pick, do you take 4 first-rounders or do you trade Kyler Murray? Like I have that on ice. I'm hoping that's not going to have to be a conversation, but that's the thing. And that's fascinating that because the Cardinals have so many needs, as long as it's not a puncher in the first round, they're going to fill a need. Now, with Jonathan Gannon coming in, with Nick Rallis coming in, linebacker coach, who's now the DC, it's like, it makes too much sense to just say, you know what? Just pick them. Just deal with it. Just pick them. It's not like a consolation prize, but it's a keep it simple, stupid thing. Now, you know the Cowboys very well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I want to ask this. We're going to jump back into the draft, but I want to give people some perspective on what I think is a abstract mirroring of the Arizona Cardinals organization in Dallas. And the reason why I say that is you've got an owner and a GM. I guess we can do Steve Keim and Michael Bidwell, even though, Jerry's kind of both over there, where it's, I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to quadruple down on every decision with one little clarity that I was right for like 2 seconds, all the money, I was a genius, and I'm going to show you why. And Steve Keim did that with Tyrann Mathieu, paid him too much money. Zach Ertz and James Conner got big deals after they came over. Like, what does the other side look like? Like, what does success look like with ownership like that? Because the Cowboys have had much more success than the Cardinals have, at least over the last handful of years.
The good news is that you can take risks on players that other teams and other front offices don't want, right? Because those guys are worried about losing their jobs.
Yeah.
In Arizona and in Dallas, they're pretty stable, like in terms of the front office structure. Like not a lot's going to change there. So listen, if you want to trade down to 7 or 8, please pick up the Raiders' first round pick. That's just like an extra lottery ticket that could help you get Caleb Williams. And Jalen Carter's still there. You know what? Nobody's going to criticize us too much if we pick Jalen Carter and he busts. It's not that big of a deal. We're probably the type of organization that can take on that kind of risk. That's how Arizona can get back to being, an actual contender is, hey, this guy falls to the second round. He probably should have been a top 15 pick. Let's go ahead and take the gamble because we know the upside is worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because it's, I see how Michael Bidwell runs his organization. It's like one of my favorite lines, kind of tongue-in-cheek, is he runs the organization as if they've won 10 Super Bowls. Don't worry. This is rudimentary. We got it. Look at the rings. And they just don't have them there. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the draft. If this is something like, if it's the Arizona Cardinals have been an overcorrection factory from, Steve Wilkes to Cliff to a defensive minded from Steve Keim to Monty Austin-Fort. Like it's been tough to right the ship when it's a seesaw, going up and down in different directions. Marcus Mosher, I do want to dive deeper into second round is edge rusher, as you mentioned, going to be potent there a little bit, and that's something that I even did a podcast where the Cardinals drafted 2 edge rushers in the first 3 rounds to solidify that position. Is it wide receiver there? I'm going to ask him more about that next. Locked On Cardinals. Oh, like this, I just want the draft to be now. Like when you're 12 and you want your birthday to be, it's 2 months away. You like, I want it now. I want it now. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals, Marcus Mosher, Locked On Cowboys and Pro Football Focus, talking Cardinals draft. Give me some second round gems, because with the Cardinals, they draft highly in the first round and every other round down the list. And they've had a little bit of success the top of the second round over the last couple of years. Byron Murphy was fine. Buda Baker, they traded up to the top of the second round. That was probably Steve Keim's best pick as a GM, trading up and getting Buda Baker. Give me some buzz names for people to keep an eye on between now and, the draft in April.
The good thing for Arizona is they're sitting at a spot in the second round where I think they're going to get a lot of talent at some pretty important positions. Let's start on the offensive line, because I mentioned how I don't love the first round offensive linemen, but the guys that you get in the second round, I do like quite a bit. Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida. I know that's who everybody has is the number 1 interior offensive line guy. Plug and play. My favorite is Steve Avila from TCU. He can play 4 different positions for you. He was awesome in the championship game against Georgia. He was awesome against Michigan. I think he's somebody that, listen, Rodney Hudson not coming back, play him at center. You need him to play right tackle, play him at right tackle. I think that would be a slam dunk pick for Arizona. And we should also mention some of the other tackles. Like, I won't be shocked if Dawan Jones falls to the second round. I don't think Darnell Wright from Tennessee makes it there, but that could potentially be an option. It just feels like 34 is going to be a sweet spot to grab a day 1 starter on the offensive line.
Yeah, because that's music to the Cardinals fans' ears. Because we had our Locked On NFL live draft show hosted by Peter Bukowski and others, and Eric Crocker, and they had me on right after they drafted, right after they traded for Hollywood Brown and then drafted Trey McBride, and I was like, Tyler Linderbaum could have been the center for this team for the next 15 years, and that's something that Rodney Hudson, it took the last paycheck. And he may bump up on another squad, even though he said he's probably going to retire. What about Luke Whippler from Ohio State? Center, can play guard. I believe he's a 3rd round grade, but have the Cardinals have they priced themselves out of him because they draft so highly in the second round? Like, is that either
Probably.
He falls to the third, falls to the third or bust?
Yeah, because I think John Michael Schmidt is pretty well regarded as the number one center in this class. And I actually think if that's the spot they want to go at 34, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think for Luke, that's probably a little bit too high. I think you're hoping at that spot to get somebody that you have graded as a top 20 player. And I just don't see Luke as being one of those type of players.
I do like to talk about dessert, even though I've always said Steve Keim needs to eat his vegetables. And if the Cardinals draft a wide receiver in the second round, be like, you know what? It makes sense, especially if they move on from DeAndre Hopkins. Like, the Cardinals, again, have needs everywhere. Is there a stud that should be a first rounder that could drop to the second round and be like, what in the wide world happened here?
I won't be shocked if Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver from TCU, falls out of the first round, just because he's coming from a conference that traditionally has not produced a lot of NFL receivers. We saw his pro day today running in the 4.5s, which is not ideal for somebody of his size. And I think a lot of these other teams in the back half of the first round, just like Jackson Smith-Njigba and Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, better. So I could see a situation where Johnson falls to pick 33, 34, 35. And really, that's the type of receiver they need, assuming they trade DeAndre Hopkins. They need somebody who can play on the outside, that can stretch the field a little bit. They have all these tiny receivers in Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch and Hollywood Brown. Go get somebody that can play on the outside. I won't be shocked if that's who Arizona picks at number 34.
That's going to be a real stomach twister, because if somebody's there, as you mentioned, that's a need. The Cardinals will have a need at wide receiver, especially when Kyler Murray comes back. It's just like what I've been struggling with, and it seems like, at least with the Cowboys, putting the Cowboys hat on, that there's some sort of plan always. It may not be the right one, but Jerry's got an idea going into a draft. It feels like with Steve Keim, it's just been, this is the big board, and we'll let other people decide who we're going to take. And it just never, and the Cardinals have been so ho-hum this whole offseason, which I think is the right move to set themselves up for 2024. But if you're the Cardinals and you have the third overall pick and you get offered 7 to move back or stay, are you 100% moving back? If you get a first next year.
I say if it's the Raiders offering me a first, absolutely. Because I think there's a legitimate chance that turns into a top 7 pick again next year. And it's just, again, we keep talking about the lottery tickets. It's another lottery ticket into the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. I think you have to, because as much as I love Willie Anderson, I called him a generational edge rusher, he's still a pass rusher, right? Yeah. Like, it doesn't change your franchise as much as a quarterback does, which Arizona very well could be in the market for next year. And if they aren't, and they're holding the number 1 pick, look how quickly you could trade that pick and get a king's ransom and instantly turn this franchise around. So I think if another team inside the top 10 is offering me a first round pick, I have no choice but to pull the trigger.
No choice. Yeah. And that's why I have you on this podcast. Great minds, man. And then one thing before I get you out of here, I've been on the train of you extend DeAndre Hopkins. And I know I get what a rebuild is. A bunch of my Twitter followers don't think that I understand that. I know what a rebuild is. And I also know that you can overpay a 31-year-old wide receiver in 2023 to open up cap space and structured it properly for when Kyler Murray comes back in 2024 and you have DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown on the same field.
Yep.
Would you, as a 31-year-old wide receiver, PEDs, injuries, even if you have him 12 games a year, would you extend DeAndre Hopkins or move him for a 3rd and a 5th, which is the high end of what they probably be able to get for him right now?
I don't really see the point of giving him away for a 3rd and 5th round pick. I don't. Now, extending him is a different situation, but I think Arizona's in a place where you can move some money around and you can do it. I think everybody assumes when you're in a rebuild that you have to get rid of every guy over the age of 28 years old and you're starting fresh, right? It's just not realistic. And it's also not a good way to do things, right? You need some leaders to show the other guys how to win. You need to show them how to practice. And that's one thing that DeAndre Hopkins does really well. It's like when he's healthy, he practices and he practices hard. So having a guy like that to help a rebuild isn't a bad thing. So if somebody wants to give you a first or second round pick during the middle of the season for DeAndre Hopkins, I think that's a different story.
Yep.
But pick 98 in 172 is not really doing anything for me.
Do the Cowboys miss Amari Cooper? Just a quick question.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And Amari Cooper, on his best day, probably will not be a Hall of Famer, even if he wins 2 Super Bowls. DeAndre Hopkins, for my money, if not a first balloter, will be a Hall of Famer.
He's on pace for it, right?
Yeah. And I mean, he was on the Andre Johnson track in Houston. Nobody respected. He didn't get the respect. 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, 1,000 yards, 10 catches, everything. I'd much rather have DeAndre Hopkins for 11 games than Rondale Moore as your wide receiver 2 for 17. It's just, he's a needle mover. It doesn't matter. His speed has never been a thing so I appreciate that you agree with me on something else. Marcus, tell people where they can find you. You're all over Pro Football Focus, Locked On Cowboys. Give me something else.
Locked On Dynasty. I also host a podcast called The Power Ranking Show with Elliot Harrison, where we talk about every team every single week. Make sure you check that out. Twitter, that's where we post all this fun and free content as of now.
Beautiful thing. Team No Sleep, Marcus Mosher,
yes.
at Marcus_Mosher, Mosher. Thanks for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Mina Kimes tomorrow. I'll talk to you then.